Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
This is a story, a new and amazing story. It's not like the other stories you know. It's about a very smart king named Suleiman, who was the son of David. There are many stories about Suleiman, but this is different. It's not about the bird called lapwing that found water, or the bird hoopoe that gave him shade. It's not about the glass path, the ruby with a bend, or the gold bars. This story is about a butterfly that's stamped. Now, listen carefully. Suleiman was really clever. He could understand what animals, birds, fish, and bugs said. He even knew what rocks said when they moved together deep under the ground and what trees said when they rustled in the morning. He understood everything, from important people to tiny plants. His queen, Bakis, was very smart too. Suleiman was also very strong. He had a special ring on his right hand. When he turned it once, magical creatures came out of the ground to do his bidding. When he turned it twice, fairies came down from the sky to help him. And when he turned it 3 times, a powerful angel will come to help him. But Suleiman wasn't a proud king. He rarely showed off, and when he did, he felt bad about it. Once, he tried to feed all the animals in the world in one day, but a sea creature ate it all up in 3 bites. Suleiman was surprised and asked, "Who are you?" The creature explained that it was the smallest of 30,000 brothers from the deep sea, and they'd heard about the big feast. Suleiman was even more surprised and admitted he'd prepared the feast to show off, not to be kind. He felt ashamed. Suleiman was very wise. He married many wives, 999, besides the most beautiful Bakis. He didn't really want so many wives, but in those days, kings married lots of wives just to show off. Some of the wives were nice, but others were mean, and they made the nice ones mean too. They all argued with Suleiman, which was tough for him. But Bakis, the most beautiful, never argued. She loved him a lot. She stayed in her rooms in the Golden Palace or walked in the garden and felt sorry for Suleiman. He could have used his magic ring to turn them into animals or something else, but he thought that would be showing off. So, when they argued too much, he walked alone in one part of the garden and wished he'd never been born. One day, after the 999 wives had argued for 3 weeks straight, Suleiman went outside to find some peace. Among the orange trees, he met Bakis, who was very sad because Suleiman was so troubled. She told him, "My lord, use your magic ring to show these queens from Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and China that you are a great and powerful king." But Suleiman shook his head and said, "My lady, remember the sea creature that made me ashamed when I showed off? If I show off to these queens just because they trouble me, I might feel even more ashamed." Bakis asked, "What will you do, my lord?" Suleiman replied, "I will endure the constant arguing of these 999 queens." So, he continued through the garden, filled with flowers and sweet-smelling plants, until he reached a big camphor tree known as the camphor tree of Suleiman. Bakis hid among the tall irises, spotted bamboos, and red lilies near the camphor tree to be close to Suleiman, her true love. Then, 2 butterflies flew under the tree, arguing. Suleiman overheard one say to the other, "Do you know that if I stamped my foot, Suleiman's palace and this garden would vanish with a loud noise?" Suleiman couldn't help but laugh at the butterfly's boast, forgetting about his 999 troublesome wives. He held out his finger and said, "Little friend, come here." The butterfly was really scared, but he managed to fly up to Suleiman's hand and clung there, fanning himself. Suleiman leaned down and whispered very softly, "Little friend, you know your stamping wouldn't even bend a single blade of grass. Why did you tell that big lie to your wife?" The butterfly saw Suleiman's wise eyes twinkle like stars on a cold night and gathered his courage. He tilted his head and said, "O king, may you live forever. She is indeed my wife, and you know how wives can be." Suleiman smiled and said, "Yes, little brother." The butterfly explained, "Well, one must find a way to keep them in line, and she's been arguing with me all morning. I said that to calm her down." Suleiman replied, "May it calm her. Go back to your wife, little friend, and let me hear what you say." The butterfly returned to his wife, who was hiding behind a leaf. She said, "He heard you. Suleiman himself heard you." The butterfly responded, "Of course he did. I meant for him to hear me." His wife asked, "And what did he say?" The butterfly, fanning himself importantly, said, "Well, between you and me, my dear, I don't blame him because his palace must have cost a lot, and the oranges are ripening. He asked me not to stamp, and I promised I wouldn't." His wife was astonished and sat quietly. Meanwhile, Suleiman laughed so hard that tears streamed down his face at the audacity of the cheeky butterfly. Bakis, the most beautiful, stood up behind the tree among the red lilies and smiled to herself. She thought, "If I'm clever, I can save my lord from the troubles of these argumentative queens." She held out her finger and softly whispered to the butterfly's wife, "Little lady, come here." The butterfly's wife flew up to Bakis's hand, trembling. Bakis bent her lovely head and whispered, "Little lady, do you believe what your husband just said?" The butterfly's wife looked at Bakis and saw her beautiful queenly eyes shining like deep pools with starlight. She gathered her courage and said, "O queen, be beautiful forever. You know how men can be." And Queen Bakis, the wise queen of Sheba, put her hand to her lips to hide a smile and said, "Little sister, I know." The butterfly's wife fanned herself quickly and said, "They get upset over nothing at all, but we have to humor them, O queen. They hardly mean what they say. If my husband believes he can make Suleiman's palace vanish by stamping his foot, it's fine by me. He'll forget about it tomorrow." Bakis said, "Little sister, you're absolutely right. But the next time he boasts, take him at his word. Ask him to stamp and see what happens. We know how men can be, don't we? He'll be very embarrassed." The butterfly's wife flew back to her husband, and within 5 minutes, they were arguing even more. "Remember," said the butterfly, Remember what I can do if I stamp my foot. His wife replied, I don't believe you at all. I'd love to see it done. Why don't you stamp now? I promised Suleiman that I wouldn't, said the butterfly, and I don't want to break my promise. It wouldn't matter if you did, said his wife. You couldn't even bend a blade of grass with your stamping. I dare you to do it. She kept saying, stamp. 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 Suleiman, sitting under the camphor tree, heard every word and laughed like he'd never laughed before. He forgot all about his queens, the sea creature, and showing off. He laughed with joy, and Bakis, on the other side of the tree, smiled because her true love was so happy. Eventually, the hot and puffy butterfly returned under the shade of the camphor tree and told Suleiman, she wants me to stamp. She wants to see what happens, oh Suleiman. You know I can't do it, and now she'll never believe me. She'll make fun of me forever. No, little brother, said Suleiman, she will never tease you again. He turned the ring on his finger, not to show off, but for the sake of the butterfly. Suddenly, 4 enormous genies appeared in front of Suleiman. Servants, said Suleiman, when this little gentleman on my finger, where the cheeky butterfly was sitting, stamps his left front forefoot, you will make my palace and these gardens vanish with a clap of thunder. When he stamps again, you will bring them back carefully. Now, little brother, he said, go back to your wife and stamp as much as you want. The butterfly flew back to his wife, who was still arguing, I dare you to do it. I dare you to do it. Stamp. Stamp now. Stamp. Bakis saw the 4 massive genies position themselves at the 4 corners of the gardens with the palace in the middle. She quietly clapped her hands and thought, finally, Suleiman is doing what he should have done long ago for his own sake, and the argumentative queens will be frightened. Then, the butterfly stamped. The genies lifted the palace and the gardens 1,000 miles into the air. There was a huge thunderclap, and everything turned pitch black. The butterfly's wife fluttered about in the dark, crying, oh, I'll be good. I'm so sorry, I spoke. Just bring back the gardens, my dearest husband, and I'll never argue again. The butterfly was almost as scared as his wife, and Suleiman laughed so hard that it took him several minutes to regain his composure and whispered to the butterfly, stamp again, little brother. Give me back my palace, you great magician. Give him back his palace, pleaded the butterfly's wife, still flying around nervously. Give him back his palace, and no more scary magic, please. The butterfly tried to sound brave and said, well, my dear, you see where your nagging has led us. It doesn't matter to me, but as a favor to you and Suleiman, I'll set things right. So he stamped once more, and immediately the genies gently returned the palace and the gardens, without a single bump. The sun shone on the dark green-orange leaves, the fountains played among the pink Egyptian lilies, and the birds continued to sing. The butterfly's wife lay on her side under the camphor tree, flapping her wings and panting, I'll be good. I'll be good. Suleiman could barely speak for laughing. He leaned back, weak and hiccuping, and shook his finger at the butterfly, saying, "Oh, great wizard, what's the point of returning my palace if you make me laugh to tears?" Then came a terrible noise as all 999 queens rushed out of the palace, screaming and calling for their children. And then wise Bakis approached them calmly, asking, "What is the matter, O queens?" They stood in a row on the marble steps and shouted, "What's our trouble? We were living peacefully in our golden palace, as usual, when suddenly the palace disappeared. We were left sitting in thick and foul darkness, and it thundered. That's our trouble, O head queen, and we're extremely troubled." It was a strange trouble, unlike any trouble we've ever known. Then Bakis, the most beautiful queen, Sulayman's very best beloved, spoke, "It's nothing, queens. A butterfly has complained about his wife, because they argued. Sulayman has decided to teach her a lesson in speaking gently and being humble, which is considered a virtue among the wives of butterflies." Bakis then gestured for that confident queen to come closer, without looking at her, and said, "Come and see." The queens descended the marble steps, 100 in a row, and under his camphor tree, they saw the most wise King Sulayman, still giggling, with a butterfly on each hand. They heard him say, "O wife of my brother in the air, remember to please your husband in all things from now on, lest he is provoked to stamp his foot once more. He's truly a great magician, one who can spirit away the very palace of Sulayman himself. Go in peace, little ones." He then kissed them on the wings, and the butterflies flew away. All the queens, except Bakis, fell flat on their faces, exclaiming, "If these things happen when a butterfly is upset with his wife, what will be done to us who have angered our king with our loud arguments for many days?" They veiled their faces, put their hands over their mouths, and quietly tiptoed back to the palace. Then Bakis, the most beautiful, walked forward through the red lilies into the shade of the camphor tree. She placed her hand on Sulayman's shoulder and said, "My love and treasure of my soul, rejoice, for we have given the queens of Egypt, Ethiopia, Abyssinia, Persia, India, and China a great and unforgettable lesson." Sulayman, still watching the butterflies play in the sunlight, asked, "My lady, when did this happen?" "I've been chatting with a butterfly ever since I came to the garden." Bakis replied, "My love and the ruler of my life, I hid behind the camphor tree and witnessed it all. It was me who told the butterfly's wife to ask the butterfly to stamp, hoping that for the sake of the jest, you would perform some great magic, and the queens would see it and be frightened." She then shared what the queens had said, seen, and thought. Sulayman got up from his spot under the camphor tree, stretched his arms, and rejoiced. He said, "My lady and the sweetener of my days, know that if I had used magic against my queens out of pride or anger, like that feast for all the animals, I would have been greatly embarrassed. However, thanks to your wisdom, I used magic for the sake of humor and a little butterfly, and behold, it freed me from the quarrels of my troublesome wives. So tell me, O my lady and my heart, how did you become so wise?" Bakis, the tall and beautiful queen, looked into Sulayman's eyes, tilted her head just like the butterfly, and said, "First, my dear, because I love you, and secondly, because I understand how women can be." Then they returned to the palace and lived happily ever after. Wasn't Bakis clever?